Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bytes.
It's great to be here.
Today we're diving into John Locke's Two Treatises of Government.
A hugely influential work.
Yeah, it's had a massive impact on political thought for centuries, and it's still relevant today.
It really is. Even if people haven't read Locke directly, his ideas about natural rights, the social contract, limited government, they're everywhere. You see them in so many modern democracies.
So for our listeners today, let's start broad. What's Locke's goal in these treatises? What are the big themes we should watch for in this deep dive?
Okay, so at its core, Locke's Two Treatises of Government is arguing for individual liberty and against absolute monarchy.
Right, so he's pushing back on the idea that kings have a God-given right to rule, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. That divine right of kings idea was dominant for centuries. But Locke confronts it head-on.
Bold move.
He really dismantles the arguments for absolute monarchy and offers a different vision of government, one built on the consent of the governed and protecting individual rights.
That consent of the governed is huge, isn't it? It's the foundation of democracy.
It really is. Locke argues that political power comes from the people, not God, not heredity.
Bottom up, not top down.
Exactly. And he introduces this idea of the social contract, where people voluntarily give up some freedom in exchange for the security and benefits of living under a government that protects their rights.
Okay, I see why this book is considered so revolutionary.
Yeah.
He's completely reframing the basis of political power.
And there's more. He goes on to outline a system of limited government. Even the legislature, which he sees as the most powerful branch, has to operate within established laws.
So it's not just about getting rid of kings, but about limiting any government's potential for tyranny.
Exactly. Locke is concerned with limiting power no matter who holds it. He wants individuals protected from government abuse, monarchy, oligarchy, even democracy.
That's an important point. We often think of Locke in the American Revolution, fighting monarchy. But his ideas about limited government are way broader than that.
You're right. And they're just as relevant today. We're still figuring out the balance between freedom and government authority, state power, citizens holding leaders accountable.
These are all super interesting points. But let's dive into the text itself and see how Locke builds his arguments. We know he challenges the divine right of kings and proposes a limited government based on consent. But how does he get there? Where do we begin?
So the two treatises are two separate works published together. The first focuses on dismantling a specific argument for absolute monarchy.
So he's responding to someone directly.
He is. It's a book called Patriarcha by Sir Robert Filmer, which was a really influential defense of absolute monarchy back then.
Okay, so what was Filmer's main point?
Filmer claimed kings inherit their authority straight from God, tracing a lineage back to Adam in the Bible. God gave Adam dominion over all the earth, and that power passed down through the generations to kings, giving them total authority.
So the king's like this God-appointed super dad.
Yeah, something like that. But Locke takes this argument apart piece by piece. He shows that Filmer misinterprets the Bible and makes flawed logical jumps.
Like what? What kind of logic is he criticizing?
Well, for example, Locke says, even if God gave Adam dominion over nature, that doesn't mean he had political power over other humans. Owning land isn't the same as having the right to rule over everyone on it.
That's a good point. Just because you own something doesn't mean you control everyone who uses it.
Exactly. Locke is separating power over nature from power over people. He's saying Filmer mixes up two very different concepts.
So Locke clears the ground for his own argument by taking down this popular defense of absolute monarchy. He's very thorough, it sounds like, in how he dismantles Filmer's reasoning.
Absolutely. Locke is known for his rigorous logic.
Yeah.
He wants to show there's no biblical or rational basis for absolute monarchy, starting with Filmer's argument.
He's pulling out the foundation.
Right. And once he's demolished the divine right of kings, at least in Filmer's version, he has to build his own case. That's where the second treatise comes in.
This is where it gets really interesting.
It is. The second treatise lays out Locke's vision of government. It's the one that had the most lasting impact, inspired revolutions, and shaped political thought.
Okay, lead us in. Where does he start? What's the basis of Locke's own political theory?
He begins with a thought experiment. Imagine life without any government, what he calls the state of nature.
So like everyone's off the grid.
Kinda. But Locke doesn't see the state of nature as total chaos. It's not a war of all against all, like some others thought.
So there's still some order, even without government and laws.
That's right. Locke believed in a natural law that governs human behavior even without formal government.
What's natural law exactly?
The idea is there are universal moral principles, true for everyone, regardless of government. These principles are based on reason and can be figured out through observation and thinking carefully.
We're born with a sense of right and wrong, is that it?
For Locke, yes. He believes humans are rational and capable of understanding and following this natural law. And that law says everyone has a right to their own life, liberty, and property.
Ah, Locke's famous natural rights, the ones Jefferson echoed in the Declaration of Independence.
Exactly. These rights are inherent, not granted by any government, so no government can take them away.
That makes sense. But if there's no government in the state of nature, who enforces those rights? What stops someone from just ignoring them and taking what they want?
That's the problem Locke points out about the state of nature. Everyone theoretically has these rights, but there's no guarantee they'll be respected. No system for settling disputes, punishing wrongdoers, ensuring justice.
So it's like everyone has a gun, but no sheriff to keep the peace.
That's a good way to put it. And that's why Locke says we form governments. We recognize the limits of the state of nature and agree to create a system to protect our rights and build a stable and just society.
And that's the social contract. Individuals willingly give up some freedom to have their rights protected and get the benefits of living under a government.
Right. And for Locke, it's crucial that this is voluntary. We choose to enter the social contract, not forced by any authority.
Consent is really key for Locke. It's what makes a government legitimate.
Absolutely. He says any government without the consent of the governed is illegitimate. It has no right to rule.
This is a radical idea. It challenges the whole top-down power structure. It's saying power comes from the people.
And that idea has resonated throughout history, inspiring countless movements for freedom and self-determination. It's at the heart of modern democratic theory.
Okay, so we have natural rights that come before government, and we form governments based on consent to protect those rights. But then what stops those in power from taking advantage and becoming tyrants?
That's the next big question. And that's where Locke's ideas about limited government come in. He knew power could corrupt.
So what's the solution? How do you have a government that's effective but not tyrannical?
He suggests a system with clear divisions of power, checks and balances, and a strong emphasis on the rule of law. No one person or group should have too much power, and government should always be accountable to the people.
Sounds like the U.S. Constitution in a nutshell.
You're right. The American founding fathers were deeply influenced by Locke. They saw his work as a framework for protecting individual liberty while promoting the common good.
We're talking about the roots of modern democracy here.
That's exactly right.
Uh-oh.
It all comes back to this radical notion. People have inherent rights, no government can take away, and government's legitimacy comes from the consent of the governed.
This is a lot to take in, but I'm fascinated. Locke's work really is foundational. He's taking on the biggest questions: human nature, power, the purpose of government.
And he does it in a way that's both rigorous and understandable. He gets into the details of political philosophy, but writes in a way that can engage a lot of people. That's probably one reason his work has had such a lasting impact.
I agree. Let's pause here. We've covered a lot. Locke's refutation of the divine right of kings, his concept of the state of nature, natural rights, the social contract.
He covers so much in these treatises.
When we come back, let's get into the details of his vision for limited government. How does he propose to structure government to prevent tyranny and protect liberty?
That's where things get really interesting. Stay with us. So we were talking about how Locke envisioned a government that safeguards liberty. Let's dig into that.
Yeah, you mentioned separation of powers earlier. Where does that fit in?
Okay, so he breaks it down into three main functions: legislative, executive, and what he called federative power.
Legislative and executive. I get making laws, enforcing laws, right? But federative is a new one. What's that about?
Federative power basically handles a nation's dealings with other nations. Think diplomacy, treaties, alliances, decisions about war and peace.
Ah, okay. So kind of like an early version of a State Department or a foreign ministry?
Exactly. Now, Locke saw these as distinct powers, but he also acknowledged that they could be combined, especially in smaller governments.
Okay, so we have this three-pronged system. But couldn't one branch, say the legislature, just grab too much power and become tyrannical?
That's a great question, and Locke was very aware of that danger. He argues that even the legislature, which he saw as kind of supreme in a lot of ways, can't just act on a whim. They have to operate within a framework of established laws.
So even the lawmakers are bound by the law.
Exactly. For Locke, nobody is above the law. He's really adamant that laws must be designed for the public good, applied equally, and not changed arbitrarily.
That's fascinating. He put so much emphasis on the legislature being constrained by the law, even though they're the ones making the laws.
It's a key point. He saw it as essential to preventing tyranny. He even argues that the legislature shouldn't be in session all the time. They should meet at set intervals or when a crisis demands it.
Why is that?
Well, he was worried about the potential for abuse if they had power continuously. Limiting their time in session was another way to safeguard against overreach.
That's really clever. So it keeps them focused on the most important issues and stops them from just churning out endless new laws that might step on people's freedom.
Exactly. He goes even further, saying that the legislature can't just transfer the power to make laws to anyone else. That power ultimately belongs to the people and can't be given away.
So no handing off lawmaking to some shadowy council or, I guess in today's world, to some super intelligent AI.
Right. For Locke, the people or their elected representatives have the authority to create laws, and that's non-negotiable.
It's amazing how much of what Locke wrote centuries ago is still relevant to the political debates we're having today. We're still arguing about the role of government, individual rights, the limits of state power.
It really is. And when it comes to governments overstepping those limits, Locke offers some pretty radical solutions. He actually argues for what we now call the right of revolution.
Yeah, the idea that people can overthrow a tyrannical government. That's had a huge impact on history. But it also sounds a bit, well, dangerous, doesn't it?
Locke was very cautious about this. He saw revolution as a last resort, not something to be taken lightly. He outlined very specific conditions that had to be met for it to be justified.
What were they? I'm guessing it wasn't just about disagreeing with a policy or a leader you didn't like?
No, definitely not. First, he said there had to be a clear pattern of tyranny, ongoing violations of rights, and the public good, not just a one-time mistake.
So a consistent abuse of power, not just an error in judgment.
Right. Second, all other options for fixing the situation had to have been tried. Appeals to the courts, petitions, peaceful protests, all of that.
So revolution is only okay when the system itself has completely failed to provide any other way of correcting things.
That's the idea. And third, Locke argued that a majority of the people had to support the revolution. It couldn't be just a small group acting on their own.
Makes sense. It has to be a real expression of the people's will, a collective rejection of tyranny.
Exactly. He emphasized that the right of revolution wasn't about promoting chaos or mob rule. It was about reclaiming the government's fundamental purpose, protecting the rights and serving the good of the people.
It's fascinating that this idea, which came out of struggles against absolute monarchy back in the 17th century, is still being debated and even invoked today.
It is, and it highlights the tension between needing an effective government and the risk that power will be abused. Locke gives us a way to think about that tension, some principles to guide us as we try to balance order and liberty.
So it's like he's giving us a blueprint for how to build a society where individual rights are protected, but where there's also a way to correct course if those rights are violated.
You could say that, but Locke wasn't just focused on systems and structures. He also believed that individual virtue and civic responsibility were really important.
Yeah, interesting. So where does individual character fit into his vision of a free society?
He felt that a healthy society needed citizens who were informed, engaged, and willing to hold their leaders accountable. He saw education and the free exchange of ideas as crucial for promoting civic virtue.
So it's not enough just to have the right laws and institutions. We also need citizens who are actively involved and committed to upholding those principles.
Precisely. For Locke, a truly free society needs both strong institutions and citizens who value liberty and are willing to defend it.
It's a powerful vision, and it feels very relevant today. We're facing so many challenges: political division, erosion of trust in institutions that really demand informed and engaged citizens.
Absolutely. Locke's emphasis on individual responsibility, along with his ideas about limited government, gives us valuable insights for navigating the complexities of the world we live in today.
This deep dive is really making me think about the foundations of a free society in a new way. It's amazing how Locke's ideas, even though they were written centuries ago, can still offer guidance and inspiration for tackling the challenges we face today.
It's the beauty of engaging with great thinkers like Locke. Their ideas can transcend time and place, giving us timeless insights into the human condition.
I think this is a good spot to take a break. We've explored Locke's ideas about limited government, separation of powers, and even the right of revolution. When we come back, let's delve into the lasting impact of Locke's two treatises. How did these ideas spread? How did they shape things like the American Revolution? And what's their legacy in the 21st century?
It's a story that covers centuries and continents, and one that continues to shape our world today. Stay with us.
We're back, ready to explore the ripple effects of Locke's two treatises. It's amazing how these ideas, written so long ago, have traveled through time and shaped so much.
Really, as Locke's work, it didn't just impact political theory, it affected real revolutions, constitutions, the way we think about individual rights today.
So how did these radical ideas challenging the very foundations of power actually spread? Was his book a bestseller right away?
Not exactly. Remember, Locke was writing when absolute monarchy was still the norm in most of Europe. Those ideas, they were dangerous to the people in charge.
He was like a 17th century rebel of the mind then.
You could say that. Actually, the two treatises were first published anonymously. Locke had been exiled once for his political views, so he knew the risks of openly going against the status quo.
Smart move.
Yeah.
But even without his name on it, these ideas caught on, right?
They did. Locke's work started circulating among intellectuals, philosophers, people pushing for change. It was talked about in salons, debated at universities, and slowly it shifted how people thought about government and individual liberty.
It was like an underground movement of ideas.
Right, and those ideas eventually made their way across the Atlantic to the American colonies.
And that leads us to the American Revolution, right? Colonists, inspired by Locke, deciding to break away from an empire.
A pivotal moment. The American colonists, they were driven by Locke's ideas about natural rights, consent of the governed, the right to resist tyranny. They used those to declare independence from British rule.
It's mind-blowing that a book written decades earlier could have such a direct impact on a revolution.
Shows the power of ideas to shape history. Even the Declaration of Independence is heavily influenced by Locke. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness clearly echoes Locke's life, liberty, and property.
Almost word for word.
Yeah.
And the whole argument for breaking away from Britain is based on Lockean principles.
Exactly. The colonists said their consent to be governed by Britain had been violated, that King George III had become a tyrant, infringing on their natural rights. They used Locke's right of revolution to justify their rebellion.
So his ideas weren't just theories. They had real-world consequences, huge ones in this case.
They did. And then the American Revolution became a model for other revolutions, for movements toward democratic reform all around the world.
Like Locke's ideas were a seed that grew into a whole forest of democracies.
That's a great way to put it. And his influence goes beyond just revolutions. His ideas about individual rights, limited government, separation of powers, they've shaped constitutions, legal systems, political thinking for centuries.
So Locke's legacy is woven right into the fabric of modern democracy as we know it.
It really is. And his impact continues today. We're still wrestling with those same fundamental questions he raised. How do we balance freedom and government authority? What are the limits of state power? What's the responsibility of citizens to hold their leaders accountable?
It's almost like he gave us a toolbox for building and maintaining a free society. Tools that we're still using, improving, debating, all these centuries later.
That's a good way to think about it. But Locke wasn't just about structures and systems. He also knew individual virtue and civic responsibility were essential.
What role did he see for individual character in a free society?
He believed a healthy society needs informed, engaged citizens, people willing to hold their leaders accountable. He saw education and free exchange of ideas as vital to promoting civic virtue.
So just having good laws and institutions isn't enough. You need people actively participating, committed to those principles.
Exactly. For Locke, a truly free society needs both strong institutions and citizens who value and defend liberty.
It's a powerful vision and feels incredibly relevant right now. With all the challenges we face, political polarization, declining trust in institutions, we need informed and engaged citizens more than ever.
It's true, Locke's focus on individual responsibility, along with his framework for limited government, those are really valuable insights for navigating the complexities of today's world.
This deep dive has been eye-opening. I knew Locke was important, but I never really understood just how vast his influence has been. It's amazing to see how his ideas have echoed through history and are still shaping the world today.
It really speaks to the power of ideas and reminds us that the debates we're having today about freedom, justice, the role of government, they're part of a much bigger conversation, one that's been going on for centuries.
That's a great point. I think we've covered a lot of ground today, from Locke's critique of absolute monarchy to his lasting impact in the 21st century. We've explored his key concepts, traced the journey of his ideas, and seen how they've shaped the world we live in.
And we've just scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore and debate in Locke's two treatises.
Absolutely. So for our listeners, we encourage you to read it for yourselves. Really grapple with Locke's ideas and decide what they mean to you in today's world.
You might be surprised by how relevant his thinking still is, even centuries later.
And with that, we'll leave you to think about Locke's legacy and the enduring power of ideas. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into one of the most influential works of political philosophy ever written.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
Until next time.